All right, we're back. Let's go into some climate news, folks. First, we'll start with an article over at What's Up With That. I had a little time to review this before tonight's program, of course. And this is just another article I wanted to use as kind of my point of setup here. First of all, U.S. media conceal 4.5 billion tons increase of CO2 by developing nations push meaningless sustainability propaganda agenda. Now, as I'm reading this, China and India account for over 67% of developing nations' CO2 emissions growth through the use of increased fossil fuel, predominantly coal fuel, where China and India accounted for about 88% of developing nations' increased coal use during the decade. And by the way, Larry, you write some very winded sentences, so thank you for that. So the United States decreased its emissions by 530 million metric tons. Okay, which makes sense to me now. Developing nations are building more CO2 emissions when you're building. I think we covered this on a previous program as well. And then when you have a nation that's established, like the United States of America, sure, we add to our economy and our infrastructure, but for the most part, we have a pretty solid foundation for the most part. Not everywhere is perfect or great. So from what I'm reading here, developing nations' increased CO2 emissions were over 8.5 times greater than the size of the significant U.S. reduction. China is continuing to increase coal use with plans to build hundreds of new coal plants in the coming decade. Oh, and I wanted to mention too, the reason why the United States dropped as far as their emissions in CO2, it's because of natural gas and how clean it is. The emissions from natural gas compared to coal are drastically lower, and it's affordable. But people in the other side of the aisle there, AOC and the others, they want to change the economy to ban natural gas and ban coal. Now, we have to be responsible with our breathing air, our drinking water. We need to be burning fossil fuels at a responsible rate. I agree 100%. I don't believe it has any effect on the climate whatsoever, and the effect that it does have is so small that it really has nothing to do with forecasting anything. The impacts are minor. My concern is that we do have a clean way of keeping everyone with electricity and heat. It's natural gas. And no one is getting upset, especially here in New York. People are getting letters saying that some commercial companies may be refused service now in the near future. This is in motion. In the next 3 years, they are moving to ban natural gas here in New York and coal. But when you look and see that India and China have increased their CO2 emissions, and remember, just because they are emitting 88% of the world's emission doesn't mean that there's a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere. That just means their emissions are 88% of the 0.004% of CO2 in the atmosphere. Keep that in mind, folks. Remember the whole example of the atmosphere being 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen and 0.004% CO2, natural and man. And the TV show host poured out a bag of rice into a bowl, pulled out 1 grain of rice, and said, "This is the amount of carbon emitted by man in Australia," and compared it to the entire bowl of rice. I mean, you can't get any more transparent than that. And that example is not exaggerated. Anyway, different topic, different show. But the reason why the US dropped in CO2 emissions was not because they're adopting green policy. It's because there was a lot more natural gas used. And I know that was a fact here in New York this year, that there was more natural gas being dispersed this year than there was coal. China and India, they continue to burn coal, lots of it, less natural gas. Therefore, they're emitting 88% of the world's CO2 emissions. That's very believable, by the way. So, as you guys read on, this is a great article talking about energy. Again, the writer here has lots of good points to bring up. But the main thing to stay focused on here, folks, is that he's right. There is a propaganda war. I'll just read the bottom half of this article here. The climate alarmist propaganda war to fabricate government entities that would control global energy use and emissions has failed. The world's developing nations have taken control of their own energy and emissions destiny, and as such have taken control of the world's energy use and emissions outcomes because of their complete dominance in these global measures. End sentence. They have achieved this result without giving up their autonomy and decision-making authority to illegitimate global government political schemers. In other words, China and India are doing what they got to do to make their country go round. Either they are paying attention to what scientists are telling them there, and they know that coal and CO2 is not the reason why the climate's a mess, and that's why they continue to increase the use of coal, possibly. I can't imagine that the Chinese government and Indian government are just hard-headed and don't care, especially when you look at how much CO2 that this report is claiming they emit into the atmosphere, pretty much almost all of it. And I know a lot of you folks out there, though, that can't be true. United States are. I know. Industrialized as hell over here. I get it. I'm only the messenger. I'm reporting this article. I feel like that there is a lot of truth to it, and he gives examples here as well. But the main story here is the reason, and this article is talking about something else, but I wanted to point this out because the one way that the U.S. has dropped CO2 emissions was because of how clean natural gas really is. Point blank. And how cheap it is. Compared to what solar and wind and hydro and nuclear is going to be, considering that that's only 17% of our energy supply right now. The other 83% comes from natural gas and coal and oil. Also, all right, 12 years to save the planet, eh? I'm going to read a little bit of this. You remember the good old days when we had 12 years to save the planet? Now it seems there's a growing consensus that the next 18 months will be critical in dealing with the global heating crisis, among other environmental challenges. Last year, the IPCC reported that to keep the rise in global temperatures below 1.5 this century, emissions of carbon dioxide would have to be cut by 45% by 2030. But today, observers recognize that decisive political steps to enable cuts in carbon to take place will have to happen before the end of next year. The idea that 2020 is a firm deadline, what I wanted to bring up too, by the way, is how much rides on what the IPCC says. So why are the next 18 months so important? The principal is looking ahead a series of critical UN meetings that are due to take place between now and the end of 2020. Ever since a global climate agreement was signed in Paris in December 2015, negotiators have been consumed with arguing about rulebook for the pact. But under the terms of the deal, countries have also promised to improve their carbon cutting plans by the end of next year. One of the understated headlines in last year's IPCC report was that global emissions of carbon dioxide must peak by 2020 to keep planet below the 1.5. Current plans are nowhere near strong enough to keep temperatures below that so-called safe limit. Right now, we are heading towards a 3 degrees Celsius heating by 2100, not 1.5. As countries usually scope out their plans over 5-10-year time frames, if the 45% carbon cut targeted by 2030 is to be met, the plans really need to be on the table by the end of 2020. Back to the IPCC, though. Jumping up and down about climate alarmism here. The IPCC, when asked about solar physics being applied to climate, the IPCC, which is trusted worldwide, supposedly, told that the consensus was that the sun does not play a large enough role and does not have an impact on the climate. And here it's NOAA, www.swpc.noaa.gov, impact space weather impacts climate. It reads here, all weather on Earth from the surface of the planet out into space begins with the sun. Space weather and terrestrial weather, the weather we feel on the surface, are influenced by the small changes the sun undergoes during its solar cycle. Folks, remember, it says small changes affect the climate here on Earth. And the unfortunate part here, and this is buried deep on NOAA, and this is not like on the front page, the duration of solar minimum may also have an impact on Earth's climate. During solar minimum, there is a maximum amount of cosmic rays, high energy particles, whose source is outside our solar system, reaching the Earth. There is a theory that cosmic rays can create nucleation sites in the atmosphere, which see cloud formation and create cloudier conditions. It states right here on NOAA, if this were true, then there would be a significant impact on climate, which would be modulated by the 11-year solar cycle. The reason why I'm bringing this article up again, we mentioned it a couple weeks ago, back when Zarkova's paper was released, because, you know, I just wanted to put a refresher out there to folks who haven't seen this yet. The IPCC, though, is supposed to be trusted. NOAA is supposed to be working on the same page with them on global warming and how the humans are doing this. But buried deep on their website is this little paragraph. The very beginning of it and the very end of it basically confirms what we are showing you folks here at the Grand Solar Minimum, that space weather impacts climate, cooling and warming. And it's all about the sun. But yet the IPCC claims that the sun does not play a major role or even a minor role, and there's no reason to research the sun any further. That is the IPCC stance. I just think it's important that I wanted to throw out here because so many people are banking on the IPCC as being, you know, the whole thing. Everybody's got to listen to what they're saying over here. Yet they don't include the effects from our solar cycles. And NOAA, even NOAA, and you guys know how we are with NOAA. I mean, I'm blocked from NOAA's .gov Facebook page. Every time I ask a question about solar cycles, they get pissed off and they block me. Or they warn me to block me. Hey, we're not going to have this discussion here. And it's funny because I've been noticing too, whenever I comment on NOAA or severeweather.eu, it's like they don't respond to anybody else but the ones who question if it's warming or not. And I find it interesting that those people seem to get a little bit more pushback versus the other folks who actually buy into the whole man is changing the climate and it's global warming and not global cooling. And all I gotta say, folks, is, you know, all we have to do is sit and wait. In the next couple of years, we're gonna know. We're definitely gonna know by this winter. And honestly, I thought people would be a little more convinced about this past winter going into spring and into the summer. And still, a lot of doubt about what some folks like Zarkova and ourselves are talking about. But I've noticed this week, they really, the mainstream has done a hell of a job at trying to debunk any type of cooling with stupid, like this right here, studies. This is from Climate Depot. They put together about 3 or 4 articles. This is the one I wanted to show you guys. But this article is like basically, little ice age. It was just, regions. It wasn't every. Pair studies published Wednesday provide stark evidence that the rise in global temperatures over the past 150 years have been far more rapid and widespread than any warming period in the past 2,000 years. Okay, so what's wrong with that statement? Well, I'm going to show you real quick.
This is Tony.
Hold on, Tony. So Tony does a really good job. I'm going to pause this real quick. Take this out of the way. Make this bigger. All right, hopefully that's not too overwhelming here. But what I want to show you is this little graph right here.
That's not going to work, Jake.
All right. So I'll go ahead and lower it. Just have to deal with it like this, guys. I'll just zoom in.
Can I maybe...
No, that's all right. I got it.
There you go.
Yeah.
You got it.
So basically, the last 2,000 years, according to this study, they are now telling us that the medieval warm period hasn't happened. That it doesn't exist. Here we are right now, guys. This is the current warming of our planet over the past 150 years. That is what they're telling you that is so unprecedented. But what about this? What about this? This is back in 1200, 1300. Okay. There was no paper mill or SUVs or man-made CO2 or anything like that going on. In fact, this was a very warm period of time. And I'll tell you, I'll actually play a little bit of Tony's video here, guys, because he has some pretty good points here in the very beginning. I'm not going to play the whole thing, just the first few seconds of it here. Let's go ahead and start it off.
In the journal Nature have found there is no evidence for globally coherent warm and cold periods over the last 2,000 years prior to industrialization. That's significant because climate change deniers have sometimes pointed to epochs like the so-called Little Ice Age or Medieval Warm Period to argue that the current global warming is one among multiple similar global climate events. So what the article is saying is that only climate deniers believe in the Medieval Warm Period and the Little Ice Age. Now let's look at who some of these climate deniers are. Well, this is the 1990 IPCC report. And there it is, the medieval warm period, much warmer than the present, with the Little Ice Age in between.
Okay, so that's my point right there. So the IPCC in 1990, this report recognizes the medieval warm period. He's going to show you another example.
The world's leading climate scientists all agreed 30 years ago that there was a medieval warm period and Little Ice Age. And these are the people who are now being called climate deniers. And here's a 1981 article from James Hansen, the world's #1 climate alarmist, once again showing a medieval warm period, a Little Ice Age, and current temperatures lower than the medieval warm period. So now we know he's just a climate denier. One of the favorite tactics of climate alarmists to try to get rid of the medieval warm period is to claim that it only occurred in England. But that simply isn't true. This is from 1975 in the New York Times. The isotopes also reflect the long-term climate changes. A remarkable finding reported in the May 1st issue of Nature is that trends in Greenland for the period 850 to 1700 AD closely match the British record for 1100 to 1950. California tree rings show a climate record similar to the one in Britain.
Okay, so the video will be here at Climate Depot once you guys check on this link. But for those of you out there who accuse people on this side of the fence as climate deniers, There's nothing we're denying about climate. In fact, we're looking at the science. And this shows you the proof right here that we're basing this information off science. The tree rings. These guys are not just pulling these numbers and findings out of nowhere like the global warming community does. This is scientifically proven, dating back in tree rings and ice cores and other sediments that you can get in the ocean floors. They're comparing and lining things up. The biggest point Tony points out is that 30 years ago, the IPCC and others believed in the medieval warm period, and now they're trying to make it disappear. And how are they doing that? Here is that propaganda. This goes back to the article I was talking to you guys about here a minute ago. This gentleman here, Larry Hamlin, about the propaganda agenda. Here it is. This is it. The NBC climate, their headline says it all. Climate scientists drive stake through the heart of skeptics' arguments. And then they want to come out and say things like, new research shows that recent rise in global temperatures is unlike anything seen in the past 2,000 years. Propaganda. We just showed you the medieval warming period. We just showed you 30 years ago when others like IPCC believed in it as well. Back then, they acknowledged it. Now this article here from NBC News is trying to erase the medieval warm period, just like that is mentioned in Tony's video as well. More than 700 scientists from 400 institutions in 40 countries have contributed peer-reviewed papers providing evidence of the medieval warm period was real and global warming and is warmer than the present, which obviously you can see that in the graph. Antarctica was warmer 1,000 years ago and life was okay. This is my favorite graph. Look at the medieval warming period. Here it is. Yes, they're acknowledging Antarctica is warmer than usual, but look at how much warmer it was back here. And did we have a climate catastrophe emergency? Was there an extinction of man during this time? So while the mainstream media wants to hide this from you guys, the data on record of old is still here. You could still find this stuff. This isn't tampered with. This is real-time stuff. And you can't tell me that the warming that's happening right now, which is where my arrow is pointing, is unlike anything they've ever seen since back here. He's saying the past 2,000 years, folks, which means all the way back here to the very end. He's saying this is bigger than this. Clearly, we can all see the difference. But we are in a battle right now. It is definitely a climate war. Just because of people who are getting papers published in a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean it is the law anymore. That's being questioned as well, unfortunately. But we're here to catch it. And I'm telling you, folks, anybody who wants to talk about that the medieval warm period didn't happen, well, direct them to this video. This link to this actual page will be on our website, so they can go to these articles, read for themselves, and also check out the evidence, like the more than 700 scientists from 400 institutions and 40 countries. And like always, here are all the links to the papers that make what they're saying truth. I mean, scientific paper after scientific paper after scientific paper after scientific paper that's peer-reviewed. That's the proof that the folks on the solar cycle side of things has for you. And what does the proof of the guy that invented the internet, I don't even want to say his name anymore, what's his proof? besides his bold predictions of no ice caps by 2013? Does he have a website that provides us scientific papers that show us that humans are causing the warming? Mari gave an answer to a gentleman who was trying to, say that CO2. Actually, Mari, could you come over here and commentate this real quick? I wanted to share with how you shared the NOAA article, and the guy told you that it was just a blog, the information about how the sun drives the climate. How did that end up for him? This was good.
Well, yesterday, I get my head in things, and then I find some things and I get triggered. I'm guilty of being triggered. So yesterday I tweeted to the president. I put, do you know, Donald Trump, not one of the IPCC published reports contain any reports from solar physicists. How can an establishment such as the IPCC not factor in our star or consult solar physicists with the sun's impact on our climate? How careless. So, this guy, and it's interesting how the trolls come out seconds after it's posted. It's crazy. And he goes back and forth with me. You can see it on Twitter. And I send him the screenshot of NOAA. Did you show it, Jake?
I did.
I sent the screenshot of not that, but the actual site with the blurb at the bottom that says the sun is the primary driver of the climate. So my point is, why isn't there solar physicists?
We've crashed the site.
Have we? So I did a screenshot,
Mari,
just this blurb.
Mari just shared this right here. She didn't show the official NOAA part. And the guy's response was classic.
Don't share no blogs. Give me, why don't you share something a little bit more official? Send me a peer-reviewed paper. No, I said, well, first off, that was NOAA, numbnuts. And here's your peer-reviewed paper. And I slapped down from nature.com Valentina's Zarkova's latest paper. And it's funny how these alarmists spin. It's like they spin wheels. They run in circles, acting like babies, saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And you keep on asking them for proof. And it's like they can't come up with proper data. All I asked was, please show me a report from the IPCC that uses solar physicists. They can't. It doesn't exist. Am I done? Maybe.
Good grief.
Maybe not.
You are terrifying.
I know.
I mean, all she had to do was just say, I got this from NOAA. But no, let's throw a little numbnuts in there at him, I guess. Hey, we got to smack them around. They smack us around. So, Mari. But like I said, guys, we're in a climate war right now. Where this is worse than the politics that's happening right around us. And that's another distraction. Everybody watching the Mueller report and ignoring the real problem, which is we need to figure out new solutions on how to deal with the impacts of what is happening with our climate. But again, thank you to Climate Depot, Mark Morano and folks, putting this all together for us. And like I said, we have proof. We can show you, these links and papers are found on these cooling blogs, but at least we have links to actual peer-reviewed studies that prove what we're saying and not just making up hypothetical, scare tactical things to get people to go into action and try to, just scare people into buying their claims. I do recommend watching Tony Heller's video, this testimony here from this person who back in 1990, I think it was trying to warn our government that people are trying to make the medieval warm period disappear from record. Why is that? Because it's inconvenient to what they're saying now. What they're saying now does not jive with what happened during the medieval warm period because that was all natural. And what we're experiencing now is supposed to be the worst warming ever, which that's not true either. So, great video. Thank you, Mark Morano and folks over there at Climate Depot. Guys, don't go anywhere as we gaze at the work of David Birch. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.